The thunder of hooves broke the dawn silence as Beatrice Livingston raced her mare across the open plains of New Mexico Territory. 1872. The wind whipped tears from her eyes, but she couldn't tell if they were from the rush of air or the crushing weight of her father's declaration the night before. "You will marry Thaddeus Harrington by month's end, or we lose everything." Behind her, Pino's Altos was just waking, the mining town's silhouette small against the vast wilderness. She'd grown up watching her father build the Livingston Ranch from nothing, expanding it acre by acre until it was one of the most prosperous in Grant County. But drought and debt had brought them to the edge of ruin, and Thaddeus Harrington, a man 30 years her senior with cold eyes and calculating hands, had offered a solution her father couldn't refuse: marriage. Her hand for his money to save their land. Beatrice pulled her horse to a stop at the crest of a hill, looking out over the valley below. Her chest heaved with exertion and despair. At 22, she dreamed of love, of choice not being bartered away like cattle. "Whoa there, miss. You're riding like the devil himself is on your tail." The voice startled her. A man on horseback emerged from a stand of pines to her right. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the rising sun. A worn Stetson shadowed his face, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in stubble and eyes the color of the New Mexico sky. "My apologies," she said, gathering her composure. "I didn't realize anyone else was out here. Most folks aren't at this hour." He nudged his horse closer. "Frank Navarro, I run cattle on the north side of these hills." Beatrice had heard of the Navarro ranch, smaller than her father's but well managed. The Navarros had come to Pino's Altos only a few years ago, keeping mostly to themselves. "Beatrice Livingston," she replied, then immediately regretted giving her name. The Livingstons were well known, and her impending marriage to Harrington would be common knowledge soon enough. Frank's expression shifted. "Livingston. Your father's John Livingston," she nodded stiffly. "I heard about your family's troubles." His voice held no judgment, just quiet understanding. Hard times can force hard choices. The kindness in his tone nearly undid her. "Some choices aren't ours to make." Frank studied her for a long moment. "Every person has choices, Miss Livingston. Some are just harder than others." Beatrice looked away, unwilling to let this stranger see the fresh tears threatening to fall. "You don't understand." "Maybe not," he conceded, adjusting his hat. "But I do know something about being backed into corners. Sometimes the way out isn't what you expect." Before she could respond, a distant shout caught their attention. Riders from her father's ranch were coming, no doubt sent to find her after her hasty departure. "I should go," she said, gathering her reins. Frank nodded. "If you ever need a friendly ear, Miss Livingston, my land borders yours to the north. Just follow Cottonwood Creek." He tipped his hat and turned his horse, disappearing into the pines as quickly as he had appeared. As Beatrice rode back to meet her father's men, she couldn't help but glance back toward where Frank Navarro had vanished. Something about his words lingered, planting a seed of possibility where before there had been only despair. 3 days later, Beatrice sat stiffly in the parlor of her father's ranch house as Thaddeus Harrington outlined his plans for their future. Her father, John Livingston, nodded approvingly at every word, relief evident in the loosening of his shoulders. The debt that had threatened to consume them would soon be gone. "I'll build you a proper house," Harrington said, his gaze sliding over her like he was assessing property. "Something befitting your new station as my wife." "Your current home seems adequate," Beatrice replied, keeping her voice neutral despite her revulsion. Harrington chuckled, the sound devoid of warmth. "A woman's thoughts on business matters. Charming." He turned to her father. "She has spirit, John. I like that." John Livingston smiled weakly. At 53, years of hard work and recent worries had aged him beyond his years. Beatrice has always had her mother's fire. Speaking of business, Harrington continued, ignoring her father's comment, I've taken the liberty of drawing up the deed transfers. Once we're wed, the Livingston debt will be settled, and your remaining lands will be joined with mine. He placed papers on the table between them. A unified holding will be more efficient. Beatrice's heart sank further. She had known the marriage was about saving their ranch, but Harrington was talking about absorbing it entirely. Her father's legacy, her legacy would disappear into Harrington's empire. The ceremony will be 2 weeks from Saturday, Harrington declared, standing. Nothing extravagant. I've no patience for frivolities. 2 weeks. 14 days until she would be bound to this man forever. After Harrington departed, Beatrice confronted her father in his study. You didn't tell me he would take our name from the land. Her father sighed heavily, pouring himself a glass of whiskey with trembling hands. What choice do we have, B? Without Harrington's money, we lose everything anyway. There must be other options. There aren't. He slammed the glass down. I've tried everything. Every bank from here to Santa Fe has turned me away. Harrington is our only hope. His voice softened. I'm sorry, my girl, I truly am, if your mother were still alive. Beatrice felt the fight drain out of her. Her mother had died bringing her into this world, and her father had raised her alone, teaching her to ride, to shoot, to love the land. He'd never remarried, dedicating himself instead to building something worthy of his daughter's inheritance. And now it was all slipping away. The next morning, Beatrice rode out early again, this time with purpose. She followed Cottonwood Creek north, the bubbling water a guide through stands of ponderosa pine and across rocky plateaus. After an hour's ride, she spotted a modest ranch house nestled in a protected valley. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a corral of sturdy horses stood nearby. The Navarro ranch was smaller than she expected, but meticulously maintained. As she approached, Frank emerged from a barn, sleeves rolled up and forearms dusty from work. He stopped when he saw her, surprise evident in his stance. Miss Livingston, he called, walking toward her. I didn't expect to see you so soon. Beatrice dismounted, suddenly uncertain why she had come. Mr. Navarro, I apologize for arriving unannounced. No apology needed. He gestured toward the house. Would you like some coffee? My housekeeper just put a fresh pot on. She nodded gratefully, and he led her to a small porch where they could sit in the cool morning air. An older Mexican woman brought them coffee in chipped but clean cups before retreating discreetly. Rosa's been with me since I bought this place, Frank explained. Makes the best coffee this side of the Rio Grande. Beatrice sipped the strong brew, gathering her thoughts. Mr. Navarro, Frank, please. Frank? His name felt strangely comfortable on her lips. I'm to be married in 2 weeks. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. To Thaddeus Harrington. You know him. A shadow crossed Frank's features. Our paths have crossed. He's been buying up every struggling ranch in the territory. Including ours, it seems, Beatrice said bitterly. My father thinks he's saving our land by arranging this marriage, but Harrington plans to absorb it completely. Frank set down his cup. That's his way. He collects land like some men collect horses or guns. Never enough. I don't want to marry him, she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. But I don't see any alternative. My father's debt, how much? Frank asked abruptly. Beatrice blinked. Pardon, the debt. How much does your father owe? She named a figure that made her stomach twist. It seemed insurmountable. Frank was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Land is the only real wealth in this territory, he said finally. Men like Harrington understand that. They'll do anything to acquire more. Including marrying women they don't love, Beatrice added. Frank turned to her, his eyes intense. Miss Livingston, Beatrice, I might have a proposition for you, not as distasteful as Harrington's, I hope. Her pulse quickened. What kind of proposition? I need to check some figures first. Would you be willing to return tomorrow, same time? Hope fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. Yes, yes, I would. That night Beatrice hardly slept, her mind racing with possibilities. She had no illusions about what Frank might propose, likely some kind of business arrangement, but anything seemed preferable to becoming Harrington's wife. The following morning, she made excuses to her father about checking fence lines and rode north again. This time, Frank was waiting for her, standing on his porch with papers in hand. I've been going through my accounts, he said after they were seated. I've managed to save a fair amount these past few years, not enough to clear your father's debt entirely, but he slid a document toward her. It was a deed to his ranch, the entire property. I don't understand, Beatrice said, confused. Frank leaned forward, his expression earnest. I'm offering you my land. It's worth enough to cover most of your father's debt. You could sell it, use the money to pay Harrington, and keep your family's ranch intact. Beatrice stared at him, astonished. You would give up your home. Why? I've seen what happens to people under Harrington's thumb. He ruins lives, breaks spirits. A muscle tightened in his jaw. My sister married a man like him in Texas. She didn't survive the first year. The weight of his words settled between them. This wasn't just charity, it was personal. I can't accept this, she said finally, pushing the deed back toward him. This is your home, your livelihood. I can start again. I've done it before. And go where? Frank shrugged. California, maybe, Oregon. There's still open country out there. Beatrice shook her head, overwhelmed by his generosity but unable to accept it. There must be another way. Frank was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. There is one alternative, though you may find it equally objectionable. Tell me, marry me instead. The words hung in the air between them. Beatrice felt her breath catch. Before you refuse, Frank continued quickly, hear me out. It would be a marriage in name only. I would add my land to yours, giving your father enough collateral to secure a proper loan from the bank in Silver City. They know me there. They'd accept my property as guarantee. You could save your ranch without losing your name or submitting to Harrington. Beatrice's mind raced. And what would you gain from this arrangement? The satisfaction of thwarting Thaddeus Harrington, Frank said with a hint of a smile. And, well, I'd hope for your friendship in time, just friendship. The proposition was startlingly different from Harrington's possessive demands. Frank was offering her a choice, a way out that preserved her dignity. I would need to live here, she said slowly, thinking through the practicalities. To maintain appearances. You would have your own room, your own space, he assured her. And after a suitable time, a year, perhaps if you wished to dissolve the marriage, I wouldn't contest it. It was more than she could have hoped for, a reprieve, a chance to save her father's land on her own terms. Yet something about it troubled her. Why would you do this for a stranger? She asked. Frank's expression softened. You remind me of my sister, before her spirit was broken. She deserved better than the fate that found her. Perhaps by helping you, I can make some small amends for failing her. The honesty in his voice moved her. This wasn't a man seeking advantage or ownership. It was someone offering genuine help, asking only for the chance to right a past wrong. I need to think, Beatrice said, and speak with my father. Frank nodded. Of course. Take whatever time you need. As she rode home, Beatrice's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. Marriage to a virtual stranger was still marriage, regardless of the terms. Yet Frank Navarro had shown her more respect in 2 meetings than Thaddeus Harrington had in all their interactions. Her father didn't take the news well. "Absolutely not," John Livingston thundered, pacing his study. "You would throw away security with Harrington for some scheme with that Navarro fellow. We barely know him." "We barely know Harrington either," Beatrice countered. "At least Frank offers me choice dignity. He offers you poverty. His ranch is 1/4 the size of Harrington's holdings." "It's enough to secure the loan we need," Beatrice insisted. "We could keep our name on our land, Father. Isn't that what you've worked for all these years?" John Livingston deflated, sinking into his chair. "I'm trying to protect you. Harrington can provide for you when I'm gone." "At what cost? My happiness, my freedom." She knelt beside his chair, taking his weathered hand in hers. "Frank's offer gives us a chance to save ourselves, not just be saved." Her father studied her face, seeing perhaps for the first time the determination of the woman she had become. "You would truly choose this path, a marriage of convenience with Frank Navarro over comfort with Harrington?" "I would." He sighed deeply. "Then I suppose I should meet this young man properly before you bind your life to his." The next day, Frank rode to the Livingston ranch, dressed in his best shirt, his dark hair neatly combed beneath his hat. Beatrice watched from the window as her father met him in the yard, the 2 men sizing each other up before shaking hands and disappearing into the barn to talk privately. An hour later they emerged, her father looking thoughtful and Frank's expression carefully neutral. When they reached the house, John Livingston spoke first. "Mr. Navarro has explained his proposition in detail," he said to Beatrice, "including his personal reasons for opposing Harrington." Frank stood straight-backed, meeting her gaze steadily. "I've told your father everything, including about my sister Clara. He deserved to know what drives my offer." John cleared his throat. "I've decided to accept Mr. Navarro's proposal if it's truly what you want." Relief washed over her. "It is, Father." "Then arrangements must be made quickly," John said. "Harrington expects an answer by week's end." 3 days later, Beatrice stood in the small church in Pinos Altos, wearing her mother's simple wedding dress, a wreath of wildflowers crowning her dark hair. Frank waited at the altar, his usual working clothes replaced by a clean black suit that highlighted the breadth of his shoulders. The ceremony was brief, attended only by her father, Rosa, and a handful of ranch hands as witnesses. When the preacher instructed Frank to kiss his bride, he hesitated, then placed the gentlest of kisses on her cheek, respectful, mindful of their agreement. Thaddeus Harrington's fury upon learning of the marriage was swift and cold. He arrived at the Livingston ranch the day after the wedding, his face mottled with rage. "You've made a grave mistake," he warned John Livingston. "That boy's land won't save you. I'll see to that." But Frank had already ridden to the bank in Silver City, the combined deeds of both properties sufficient to secure the loan they needed. By the time Harrington tried to block them, the debt was settled, the Livingston ranch secure. Beatrice moved to Frank's ranch the following week, bringing only her personal belongings and her favorite mare. Rosa welcomed her warmly, showing her to a comfortable bedroom Frank had prepared true to his word, her own space. That first night they sat on the porch after dinner, watching stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. "Thank you," Beatrice said softly, "for keeping your promise." Frank nodded, his profile strong in the fading light. "I meant what I said. This arrangement is for your protection, not my benefit. Still, you've given up much." He turned to her, a smile touching his lips. "Not as much as you might think, Beatrice. I've gained a respected wife, an alliance with one of the oldest families in the territory, and the immense pleasure of witnessing Thaddeus Harrington's defeat." She laughed. the sound carrying across the quiet valley. "When you put it that way, perhaps I should be thanking you for the privilege of our arrangement." His smile deepened. "Perhaps we can agree to be grateful for each other." The weeks that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Frank rose before dawn to work his cattle, while Beatrice helped Rosa with the house and garden. In the afternoons, she often rode out to help him mend fences or check on calves, discovering that she enjoyed the work and Frank's quiet company. They took dinner together each evening, their conversations growing more comfortable as they learned each other's histories. Frank had come from Texas, the son of a Spanish mother and an American father, building his ranch from nothing after leaving home at 18. He spoke of his sister Clara with lingering grief, explaining how her husband's cruelty had driven her to take her own life. "I should have done more," he confessed one night. "I knew the man was hard, but I never imagined." "You couldn't have known," Beatrice said gently, reaching across the table to touch his hand. The contact was brief, but sent a strange warmth through her fingers. Frank visited the Livingston ranch regularly, helping John improve irrigation systems and introduce hardier cattle breeds. Beatrice watched with surprise as her father and husband developed a genuine respect for each other, the older man increasingly relying on Frank's innovative ideas. "That boy knows ranching," John admitted to Beatrice during one of her visits home. "Got a good head on his shoulders." "He's not a boy, Father," she corrected automatically. At 30, Frank was 8 years her senior, a man in his prime. John gave her a knowing look. "Finding more in this marriage than you expected, are you?" Beatrice flushed, unwilling to examine too closely the growing warmth she felt toward Frank. Their arrangement was practical, not romantic. Yet she couldn't deny that she looked forward to his company, missed him when he was gone. As summer turned to fall, tensions with Harrington escalated. First, access to a shared water source was mysteriously blocked. Then Livingston cattle began disappearing, only to be found dead in remote gullies. "Harrington's men," Frank said grimly after discovering 3 slaughtered steers. "He's sending a message." "We should report this to the sheriff," Beatrice insisted. "Sheriff Blake," Frank scoffed. "He's in Harrington's pocket, has been for years." "Then what do? Frank's jaw tightened. "We protect what's ours." That night, Frank organized the ranch hands into watches, patrolling the borders of their combined properties. Beatrice insisted on taking shifts as well, her skill with a rifle earning grudging respect from the men. 3 nights later, she and Frank were riding the eastern boundary when they spotted torchlight moving through a distant stand of trees. Without a word, they dismounted, tethering their horses before advancing on foot. 4 men were setting fire to a dry creek bed that ran through Livingston land, the flames licking at drought-parched grass. "Stop right there," Frank called out, his rifle raised. The men turned, startled. Beatrice recognized Harrington's foreman among them. "This is private property," she added, stepping up beside Frank, her own rifle steady. "Mrs. Navarro," the foreman sneered. "Playing at being a real rancher with your convenient husband," Frank's voice was deadly calm. "Put out those fires and leave, now. Or what?" One of the men challenged, hand hovering near his holster. The standoff stretched for a tense moment before Frank fired a single shot, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from the man's boot. "Next one won't miss," he promised. The men hastily stomped out their torches, mounting up with muttered curses. The foreman lingered, his gaze malevolent. "Harrington won't forget this," he warned. "You've made powerful enemies." After they'd gone, Beatrice and Frank worked together to ensure no embers remained, the night silent except for the distant howl of coyotes. "We can't keep doing this," Beatrice said finally. "Harrington won't stop." Frank straightened, wiping soot from his hands. In the moonlight, his face was all plains and shadows, his expression grave. No, he won't. Men like him only understand power and consequences. What are you suggesting? He was quiet for a long moment. I think it's time we paid a visit to Silver City. There are still honest men at the territorial court, men who might listen if we bring enough evidence. The ride to Silver City took most of a day. They stayed at a small hotel, taking separate rooms as befitted their arrangement, though Beatrice found herself strangely reluctant to part from Frank's protective presence. The territorial judge, an aging but sharp-eyed man named Hollister, received them in his chambers, listening intently as Frank outlined Harrington's pattern of intimidation and sabotage. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Navarro," Judge Hollister said. "Do you have proof?" Frank produced a ledger containing detailed accounts of each incident, along with sworn statements from ranch hands who had witnessed Harrington's men trespassing. "I can also testify," Beatrice added, "to Mr. Harrington's threat against my father when our engagement was broken." Judge Hollister's eyebrows rose. "So the rumors about your hasty marriage are true, Mrs. Navarro. It was to thwart Harrington's ambitions." Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Our marriage had multiple motivations, Your Honor." The judge studied her face, then Frank's, a knowing smile touching his lips. "I see. Well, this evidence warrants investigation. I'll send the federal marshal out tomorrow." As they left the courthouse, rain began to fall, a rare blessing in the drought-stricken territory. They ran for the shelter of a nearby general store's awning, laughing as they shook water from their hats. "We did it," Beatrice said, exhilarated. Frank grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "We make a good team, Mrs. Navarro." The way he said her married name sent an unexpected thrill through her. In that moment, with rain drumming on the canvas above and his smile warming her more than it should, Beatrice realized something had shifted between them. This no longer felt like an arrangement of convenience. It felt like partnership, perhaps even more. That evening they took dinner in the hotel restaurant, their conversation easier than ever before. Frank told stories of his youth in Texas, making her laugh with tales of his misadventures. "I never thought I'd find joy in this marriage," Beatrice admitted as they lingered over coffee. "I expected duty, perhaps friendship at best, but, Frank prompted softly when she hesitated. Beatrice met his gaze, finding warmth and something deeper there. "But I've found much more." Frank reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "As have I, Beatrice. Far more than I deserved." The touch of his skin against hers sent a current through her body, awakening feelings she'd carefully suppressed since their wedding. This was dangerous territory, far beyond their original agreement. "It's getting late," she said, withdrawing her hand reluctantly. "We should rest before the journey home tomorrow." Frank nodded, respecting her retreat. "Of course." He walked her to her room, pausing at the door. For a breathless moment, Beatrice thought he might kiss her properly this time, not the chaste peck of their wedding day. Instead, he simply brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch feather light. "Good night, Beatrice," he murmured. "Good night, Frank," she whispered back, slipping into her room with her heart racing. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind filled with new possibilities. What had begun as a pragmatic alliance was evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. But did Frank feel it too? Or was she misinterpreting kindness for deeper affection? The return journey to Pino's Altos the next day was quieter, both lost in thought. As they approached the Navarro ranch, Beatrice noticed smoke rising from beyond the northern ridge. "Frank," she said, pointing. "Something's wrong." They spurred their horses forward, cresting the hill to find the ranch house ablaze, flames shooting from the roof and windows. Rosa stood in the yard, held back by two ranch hands as she wept. "No," Frank shouted, leaping from his horse and running toward the burning building. "The men came just after dawn," Rosa explained between sobs as Beatrice reached her. "Harrington's men. They said it was a message. Frank organized a bucket brigade from the well, but it was too late. By sundown, all that remained of the Navarro ranch house was a smoldering shell, the acrid smell of burned timber hanging in the air. They salvaged what they could, some furniture from the yard where Rosa had managed to drag it, tools from the barn that had been spared, a few photographs and books that had survived in a trunk. Everything else is gone," Frank said hollowly, standing amidst the ruins. "My father's watch. My mother's Bible." His voice cracked. "Clara's letters." Beatrice felt his grief as her own, understanding the weight of those lost connections to his past. Wordlessly, she slipped her hand into his, offering what comfort she could. That night, they took shelter in the barn, Rosa sleeping in the tack room while Beatrice and Frank sat outside, watching embers glow in the remains of their home. "Judge Hollister was right," Frank said finally. "Harrington won't stop until he gets what he wants." "Which is what? Revenge? Land? Power?" Frank turned to her, his face grim in the faint light. "He wants to break us, force us to sell." Beatrice squared her shoulders. "Then he doesn't know who he's dealing with." For the first time since discovering the fire, Frank smiled, just a small curve of his lips, but it lightened her heart. "No," he agreed. "He doesn't." They spent the next week at the Livingston ranch, John insisting they stay while deciding how to rebuild. Federal Marshal Cooper arrived as promised, documenting the arson and collecting testimony from Rosa and the ranch hands. "Harrington's gotten bolder," Cooper observed. "Burning a man's home crosses a line most wouldn't dare." "Will it be enough to bring charges?" Beatrice asked. The marshal sighed. "It's your word against his, and Harrington has friends in high places. But this fire changes things. Judge Hollister is asking questions in Santa Fe. Harrington's other business dealings are being examined more closely." It was something, at least. A small justice that might lead to larger consequences. With the marshal's investigation underway, Frank turned his attention to rebuilding. He spent long hours with Beatrice's father, poring over plans for a new house larger than before, designed to accommodate a growing family. "You're planning ahead," Beatrice remarked one evening, studying the drawings that showed 3 bedrooms. Frank looked up, a question in his eyes. "Is that presumptuous of me?" She thought of their agreement, the year's term, the promise of freedom afterward. 6 months had passed already. In another 6, she could leave if she chose, their arrangement complete. The thought brought no joy. "No," she said softly, "it's not presumptuous." Something shifted in Frank's expression, hope perhaps, or relief. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Beatrice, I know our arrangement was meant to be temporary, but..." A commotion outside interrupted him. They hurried to the porch to find one of the Livingston ranch hands dismounting in haste, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Mr. Navarro, Miss Beatrice," he called. "Harrington's men are driving a herd across your north pasture, trampling everything in their path." Frank's expression hardened. "Gather the men," he ordered, "and send for Marshal Cooper." Within minutes, they were mounted and riding hard for the Navarro property. Beatrice insisted on coming, ignoring her father's protests. This was her fight too. They crested the ridge to find chaos below. A herd of several hundred cattle thundered across the carefully cultivated hay field that was to feed their own stock through winter. Harrington's men drove them deliberately through the heart of the field, destroying months of work. Frank signaled their ranch hands to circle wide, cutting off the herd's progress. Beatrice rode at his side as they approached the lead drover Harrington's foreman again, a smug smile on his weathered face. "This is private property," Frank called out. "Turn that herd around." "Just passing through," the foreman replied, "taking a shortcut to the western range." "There's no trail here," Beatrice countered. "You're trespassing and destroying our crops deliberately." The foreman spat tobacco juice onto the trampled grass. "Prove it." Frank's hand moved to his holster. "I don't need to prove anything on my own land." Tension crackled between the two groups of men. Beatrice counted at least 12 on Harrington's side against 8 of their own. Not good odds if it came to violence. Then, from the south, came the sound of more riders. Marshal Cooper appeared with 3 deputies, their badges catching the afternoon sun. "What's happening here?" Cooper demanded, surveying the scene. The odds had shifted. After a tense standoff, Harrington's men begrudgingly turned the herd, driving them back toward the proper trail. The foreman lingered, his gaze malevolent. "This isn't over," he warned. "Mr. Harrington doesn't lose." "He just did," Frank replied evenly, but the victory felt hollow as they surveyed the damage. The hay field was destroyed, the soil compacted by hundreds of hooves. Their winter feed was gone. "We'll have to buy hay from the northern ranches," Frank said grimly, "at premium prices." "If they'll sell to us at all," Beatrice added. "Harrington has influence with many of them." That night, as they sat before the fire in her father's house, the full weight of their situation settled on them. Homeless, their winter feed destroyed, their savings soon to be depleted by necessary purchases, Harrington was systematically dismantling their ability to survive. "Perhaps we should consider selling after all," John Livingston said heavily. "Before there's nothing left to save." "No." Frank's voice was quiet but firm. "That's what he wants, to break us down piece by piece until we have no choice." Beatrice studied her husband's profile, seeing the determination that had first drawn her to him. "What do you suggest instead?" Frank turned to her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "We fight back, but not his way, not with destruction and intimidation. We use the law, the courts, public opinion." "How?" John asked skeptically. "The territorial newspaper," Beatrice suggested, understanding Frank's strategy. "We tell our story, all of it." Frank nodded. "And we talk to the other ranchers Harrington has pressured. I doubt we're his only victims." The next day, they rode into Silver City to meet with Elijah Barnes, editor of the Territorial Enterprise. Barnes was initially reluctant to publish anything that might antagonize a powerful man like Harrington, but the evidence they presented along with Marshal Cooper's official reports eventually convinced him. "I'll need statements from others," Barnes said, making notes. "Former Harrington employees, other ranchers he's strong-armed." "I can provide names," Frank assured him. "People who might speak if they knew they weren't alone." Over the next 2 weeks, Frank and Beatrice traveled throughout Grant County, visiting small homesteads and ranches where Harrington had left his mark. Slowly, they collected testimonies: a widow forced off her land through manipulated water rights, a rancher whose cattle mysteriously died after he refused to sell, a shopkeeper driven to bankruptcy when Harrington called in loans without warning. "He's created a small empire through fear," Beatrice observed as they rode back from yet another disheartening interview. "Everyone knows, but no one speaks out." "Until now," Frank said, determination in his voice. By the time the first snow dusted the mountains around Pinos Altos, Barnes had enough material for his exposé. The article ran across 3 full pages of the Enterprise, detailing Harrington's pattern of intimidation, corruption, and violence. Marshal Cooper contributed an official statement confirming ongoing investigations, and Judge Hollister was quoted expressing concern about the allegations. The response was immediate. Townspeople who had long suspected Harrington's methods now had confirmation. Other victims came forward with their own stories. The territorial governor, sensitive to public opinion as he sought re-election, ordered a formal inquiry. Harrington's retaliation was swift. He filed suits for slander against Frank, Beatrice, and the newspaper. He called in debts from merchants who supported them, pressured the bank to reconsider their loan. "He's desperate," Frank observed as they read the latest legal notice delivered to the Livingston ranch. "These are the actions of a man losing control." Work on rebuilding the Navarro ranch house continued despite the challenges. The community rallied around them, neighbors contributing lumber, labor, and supplies. Even ranchers who had once been wary of Frank now stood with him against Harrington's intimidation. As Christmas approached, the new house took shape: sturdy log walls, a stone fireplace, windows looking out over the valley. Frank insisted on one particular feature: a wide, covered porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. "Like we did at the old house," he explained when Beatrice questioned the expense during such difficult times. "Those evenings, they matter to me." His words touched her deeply. Those quiet moments on the porch had become precious to her, 2 times when their conversation flowed easily, when the pretense of their arrangement seemed to fade into something more genuine. The legal battles with Harrington stretched into the new year. February brought heavy snow and the news that the territorial court had dismissed Harrington's slander suits, finding insufficient evidence to proceed. It was a small victory, but significant. In early March, nearly 9 months after their wedding, Beatrice and Frank moved into their new home. It was larger than the original, with smooth wooden floors, a spacious kitchen, and the promised 3 bedrooms, though they continued to use only 2, maintaining the boundaries of their arrangement. The rebuilt house felt like a fresh beginning. Rosa fussed over the kitchen, delighted with its modern stove and ample storage. The ranch hands celebrated with a small gathering, bringing food and music to christen the new hearth. As the party wound down and guests departed, Beatrice found herself alone with Frank on their new porch, wrapped in blankets against the early spring chill. Stars punctuated the clear night sky, and the distant howl of a wolf echoed through the valley. "It feels like home," she said, surveying the peaceful scene. "More than I expected," Frank nodded, his shoulder warm against hers. "I worried it wouldn't, that you might miss your father's house." "I visit him often enough," she replied with a smile, "but this is where I belong now." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. In 3 months their year would be complete. The agreement would end, and with it, potentially, their marriage. Neither had spoken of it directly, though Beatrice had caught Frank watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read: thoughtful, almost wistful. "Beatrice," he said now, turning to face her fully. "There's something I need to say." Her heart quickened. "Yes. When we made our arrangement, I promised you freedom after a year, the chance to—" He swallowed hard, "to leave if you wished." "I remember," she said softly. "That time is approaching." His voice was steady, though she saw tension in the set of his shoulders. "And I need you to know that I will honor that promise, whatever you decide." Beatrice studied his face in the faint light spilling from the house windows. The strong jaw, now familiar to her touch when she brushed her fingers against it in passing. The clear eyes that had looked at her with respect from the very beginning. The mouth that had only ever spoken truth to her. "What if I don't want to leave?" she whispered. Hope flared in his eyes, quickly tempered with caution. "Is that what you're saying?" "I'm saying that this stopped being an arrangement of convenience for me months ago." Courage gathered in her chest. I'm saying that I care for you, Frank, deeply." He released a breath, his hand finding hers between them. "I have loved you since the moment you rode onto my land that first morning," he confessed. "Too proud to accept help, too determined to give up. But I promised myself I wouldn't speak of it, wouldn't pressure you. You love me?" The question emerged breathlessly. Frank's free hand came up to cup her cheek. "With everything I am, I thought perhaps you knew." "I hoped," she admitted. "But I wasn't certain. We never discussed changing the terms of our agreement." "I'm discussing it now," he said, his voice low and serious. "I don't want a marriage in name only anymore, Beatrice. I want a true partnership, a life together. Children, if you'll have them, but only if it's what you want too." Beatrice leaned into his touch, her heart full. "It is what I want, it's all I want." When his lips finally met hers, it was nothing like the chaste peck of their wedding day. This was a kiss years in the making, full of longing and promise and newfound certainty. His arms encircled her, drawing her against his solid warmth as she wound her fingers into his hair. "I love you," she murmured against his mouth. "I think I have for months." Frank smiled against her lips. "Then we've been fools, haven't we? Sleeping in separate rooms when we could have been." "That can be remedied immediately," Beatrice interrupted, returning his smile with a boldness that made his eyes darken. They celebrated their new understanding thoroughly that night, discovering each other in ways both tender and passionate. Beatrice marveled at how perfectly they fit together, how natural it felt to trace the contours of his body, to welcome him into hers. What had begun as an arrangement had transformed into something neither could have anticipated, a love born of respect, forged in adversity, and all the stronger for it. In April, news reached them that changed everything. Thaddeus Harrington had been indicted by a grand jury in Santa Fe, charged with multiple counts of fraud, intimidation, and conspiracy. The testimonies Frank and Beatrice had gathered formed the backbone of the case against him. "It's over," Frank said as they read the telegram from Judge Hollister. "He can't hurt us anymore." The trial lasted 3 weeks, with both Frank and Beatrice testifying to Harrington's campaign of destruction against them. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, sentencing Harrington to 10 years in territorial prison, the courtroom erupted in cheers. As summer bloomed across the New Mexico highlands, life at the Navarro ranch settled into peaceful productivity. The cattle flourished, the hay fields regenerated, and Frank expanded their holdings by purchasing a small adjacent property when its elderly owner decided to return east. In July, on their first wedding anniversary, Frank presented Beatrice with a gift, the deed to their entire property, with both their names inscribed as equal owners. "I gave you my land and called it duty," he said, echoing their original arrangement. "Now I give you everything I have and call it love." Beatrice, already glowing with the secret knowledge that their family would expand by winter, pulled her husband close. "And I accept it with all my heart." 5 years later, Frank and Beatrice Navarro stood on their porch, watching their children play in the yard, 4-year-old John chasing his 2-year-old sister Clara with a toy horse. Beatrice leaned against Frank's solid frame, his arm secure around her waist, his hand resting protectively over the swell of their third child. The Navarro Livingston Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the territory, known for its fair dealings and innovative methods. John Livingston, now in his 60s but still spry, divided his time between his own ranch and helping with his grandchildren, who adored their grandfather's stories. Thaddeus Harrington remained in prison, his empire dismantled, his land sold to the very people he had once terrorized. The dark shadow he had cast over Pino's Altos was fading into memory. "Did you ever imagine this?" Beatrice asked, smiling as John helped his sister up after a tumble, displaying the gentle heart he'd inherited from his father. Frank pressed a kiss to her temple. "Not in my wildest dreams. I thought I was offering you a business arrangement, a temporary escape. And instead, I found everything I never knew I needed." He turned her in his arms, looking into the face that had become more dear to him with each passing day. "You gave purpose to my land, Beatrice. But you gave meaning to my life." As the sun set over the mountains they both loved, painting the valley in gold and crimson, Beatrice silently blessed the desperate ride that had led her to Frank Navarro's land that fateful morning. What had begun as an escape from one man's greed had become a journey into unexpected love, a love freely given, not coerced, a partnership of equals, not possession. She had been forced to wed for land, but Frank had given her his and called it love. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, a choice. The choice to stay, to build, to love in return. In the vast landscape of the New Mexico territory, where fortunes rose and fell with the unpredictable rains, they had created something rarer and more precious than gold, a home founded on respect, strengthened through adversity, and sustained by a love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of arrangements. "I wouldn't change a thing," Beatrice whispered, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of her husband's face. "Not a single moment of our journey." Frank's arms tightened around her as the children's laughter echoed across their land, the perfect harmony to complement the beating of their hearts. "Nor would I," he murmured against her lips. "Nor would I."